Hey, it's Jess, and welcome to The Heart Strong, a podcast where we explore navigating the challenges in our lives. It's my personal mission to guide you towards your greatest potential. So come along with me as we explore living with courage, or as I put it, living heart strong. On this episode, I'm sitting down with Matt and Sarah Hammitt. Matt and Sarah are parents to 4 kids. They're artists, entrepreneurs, creators, documentary filmmakers. Matt is a seasoned and accomplished musician, and they are here today talking about life. We cover real topics like faith and marriage and family and weathering challenges and what it's like to raise a kid with an uncertain future. I met the Hammitts because my son Ethan and their son Bowen were both born with congenital heart disease or hypoplastic left heart syndrome, which is a very rare congenital heart defect. And so we've had the privilege of working together to serve the community in a few different projects. But over and above that, I've gotten to know them as people. And what I love about them is that they're open and real and vulnerable, and they love people. They really do. They want to set a wide table in their life for people, and they want to serve out of their story. And so that's what we're talking about today. So I am excited to share this episode with you, and I hope that you'll take something from it that really serves you. And if it does, feel free to share it with your friends. All right, let's take a listen. Matt and Sarah Hammitt, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here today.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So I thought we would just start the conversation by just, if you guys could just tell everyone listening a little bit about yourselves and your family and kind of how you're showing up here today.
So we're the Hammitts, and been married for 22 years and have 4 kids, all different ages, almost 17, 15, no, 14. Oh my gosh. 14, 12, and 10. Man, oh man. So you keep telling me how Claire's almost 15. It's like when you're on the cusp of it, it's like going to the drive-through pharmacy and they ask you for your kid's birthday.
Right.
And they want the year too. You know, it's like,
Yes.
It's okay if it's the month and day, but they want the year. I get really screwed up and I feel like a horrible father. I'm like, I got 4 of them. But yeah, so we've been, just kind of on a crazy journey over the past 20 years of just doing creative things and entrepreneurial things and trying to keep family strong. And so we're excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you guys too. So let's dive into that and talking about 20 years and family and how you're keeping your priorities, because I think it's something that frankly, like, we all struggle with, because if we're humans, if you're showing up as a human, as a parent, it's tough stuff. So, early on in your career, Matt, you had like wild success in music, and you guys have been on a really cool journey with music. And, you decided at one point just to take a step back. And I'm sure that's a decision that you made together as a couple. And so I think this is a tension that a lot of people face today, the tension between family and the desire to do that well, and the desire for success and for pursuing the things that we love to do. And so I'm wondering if you'll just share with us a little bit about, if you can go back in time in your mind, and how you made that decision together and how you keep making that decision. Because I think it's not a one-time choice, right? It's something we have to keep choosing through different seasons of our life.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Early in the 2000s, about 2001, 2 crazy big things happened in my life. I got married to Sarah and I signed a record deal, with Sparrow Records, which is now part of Capital Christian Music Group. And so we just hit the road as a young married couple, and it was really difficult to figure out, but we were together. And so there was a lot of years, about 4 years, where we adventured together. And then Sarah got pregnant with our first baby, who's now our 16-year-old, Emmy. And everything kind of changed. We went from doing the adventure together to her coming home and being a mother at home. And then I was out kind of still pursuing the dream of music with my friends. And so it really did create a lot of tension for both of us to figure out, how do we make family work at a distance? And then for me as a father and a husband, how do I chase a career dream and balance it with my family dream, knowing that my career dream was taking far more of me and that the family dream was far more important. So that I think was always a tension inside of me. So even, as I continued through the 6 albums that we made as my band Sanctus Real, I would say by the second or third record, I was already feeling a lot of that tension, but I didn't really have it sorted, like I think I was learning how to sort it, the feelings and the emotions versus like the action of what do we actually need to do to make this work. And then in 2016, actually, I made the decision about a year and a half before that, but in 2016 stepped away from the band to be home with my family more.
Yeah.
So.
And it wasn't just his dream, it was his occupation. It's how he made money.
Yeah.
And we didn't go to college because, well, I did for a year until he told me to quit and go on tour. but I mean, that's what we had. And so we didn't, I mean, it wasn't like you could just stop and go do something else. The ball was already rolling really well.
Yeah.
So it was tricky.
Yeah. It's like, it's that balance of like, hey, the doors are opening. We have success. Which ones do we walk through and which ones do we not? I think that's always the question when you're talking about choosing every day. And even now, as I'm still year to year figuring out where I put my creative energy, what do I say yes to and what do I say no to, so that I can have the margin and the space for family and for doing the things that that I have brewing inside of my heart, and not just committing to something that, for the sake of just a job or to fill my time,
Yeah. And I think that's like the tension of being a creator, right? It's like, you feel called to something. There's like this deep feeling inside of you that you feel called to something, and there's practicalities of life. And that, and being an artist, being an entrepreneur, being a creator, like there is that tension. And I'm just wondering, how have you like evolved through that or iterated that? Because I think there'll be people listening. It's like they have those desires, they have those interests, they have that bent of that. And yet it's like, how do we balance those things? Because and I kind of bringing into this too, like we're individuals, right? We're couples, we're individuals, we're parents. We need to honor all of those things in some way because God made us all of those things. How do you think about that as individuals and like as a couple?
Yeah, I think like you're saying, the autonomy of being an individual, I had to learn he's super creative. So I can't, as a wife or as a spouse, squelch all that. But at the same time, it can't be all of who he is, right? So there was, and we still are having balance. I think when he was actually on the road, though, anytime he sacrificed something from the road, it was because of us. And so there was a very clear this for that and that for this. Now that he's home and he's still creative, it's kind of our thing. And so it feels less tense, because everything feels almost like it benefits us as a couple all the way along. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, even right now, he's in a super creative space. He's making music and, we're seeing it. It's shaping up. He also has business things going on. So it's like it kind of ebbs and flows in our life. Like all of a sudden it'll be just everything will open. And I've learned to just like, okay, pull the kids. I kind of take more of the responsibility. I try to keep things more orderly so he can function creatively. And we found a pretty good balance. And then we can talk openly about what those tensions are, because it also gets tense, like, whoa. And so we can, after 22 years, thank God we've learned how to talk about it a little better.
Yeah. I think too, I'm learning as well. I had to learn that Sarah is also a creative person. And so I had to learn how I could fuel her gifts as well. So like, as you're aware, we made the documentary Bowen's Heart.
Yeah. I want to talk about that.
Yeah. And we're not there yet, but just as an example of something that she had in her heart that was a creative idea of how we could do something that could hopefully be a blessing to other people, walking through hardship. And me learning to blow wind in her sails and support the vision she had. So I think when I was on the road, I was gone so much. It was like I only had enough capacity to think about, well, what's my creativity and how do I keep fueling that thing? And now I have the margin in my life to go, okay, that's cool. I get to be creative. She supports me. Well, how do I then also turn and support her and her creative endeavors? And that, I think, too, leaves more freedom. Like, it's not a feeling of like, well, you got to do this and now I get to do this. It's like, no, there's a mutual giving and respect of each other's creative gifts that gives more of a freedom in a way to like just work more freely without that tension or guilt around like, am I taking too much of the, like,
and I
you
think,
get what I'm saying?
yeah, and I think the way you measure that is you self-evaluate realistically and even get feedback from people around you. Like, am I giving him enough? Is it balanced? Do you know what I mean? I think sometimes we can think it's balanced, but it's not. So.
Yeah. And it's also like not doing that keeping score thing that you guys, because I mean, that's a thing in relationships, right? I mean, it definitely is. And I think it's like everyone can't be in their season all the time. Sometimes it's, and then it's also that evolving, like my husband, Eric, says to me, he's like, I think one of the challenges that couples, one of the downfalls, he's like, especially guys, he's like, is that they stop growing as people. And then if you're not growing as individuals, there's no way in heck you're going to be able to grow together. And that growth produces exactly what you both were saying, like that self-awareness so that you can support the other person. That's like really hard work,
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Bowen's Heart, because we're talking about entrepreneurship and creativity, and, tell everyone listening about that movie and that documentary that you made. I mean, it's so beautiful, and I love the heart that you have behind it. So yeah, tell us about Bowen and about kind of Sarah. I know that was like your baby, kind of, your
magnum
brainchild, I should say.
Yeah.
Pardon?
I called it my magnum opus. Like, it was
There
just
we
like,
go. There we go. I love it.
Life's work of kind of, I don't know. It was a great outlet. I think like it's interesting, like I had to do a lot of like digging of why did we do this? There's like, and there's a million different layers to why. One was because if we found out 6 months before he was going to have this third open heart surgery. I was hoping maybe he wouldn't have to do it, even though that was unrealistic. But once I realized, okay, he has to do this, I really felt like deep in my heart, we were supposed to create something. And I think it was like manyfold. It was like, okay, if we create something, then the pain isn't so hard to bear because there's something I can see tangibly that's being created. Even though there's a ton of things that come out of pain, I can point at it. There it is. Another one was I had, he was almost 9 and he was supposed to have his surgery 7 years prior. And every year I just kept pushing it off. And when I would think about the day that I had to put him in the car to take him, I almost couldn't even think about putting one foot in front of the other. And so I thought, well, if we have this documentary, I have to do it. Like, there's no way around it. Like, here we go. We're doing it. It's a commitment,
Yeah.
And also I thought, if anything happened, we would have all of this, we would have these memories. And so anyways,
yeah. And I loved the idea. I mean, I guess I've seen through music how powerful it is to vulnerably share a story, right? Because that's really what connects us with people. And so I think for me, I really loved the idea of the value that we could add to other people's lives by simply just being vulnerable with them and showing them, how we walked through this difficult season so that when they're walking through a difficult season, they too can say, hey, if they made it, we made it. Or even beyond that, just to go, gosh, we're not alone. And that has been the feedback we're getting from people, that they're like, hey, wow, like it was so wonderful for us to know we're not the only ones going through this. And a lot of families have said, we've shared this with our friends or family or our parents to help them understand what it is we're actually going through as a family. And so we've given them maybe like a tool to be able to help educate, and then also like express what it
Mm-hmm.
is that for families that they may not know how to express themselves to the people they love about what they actually are dealing with. And maybe that equips other people around them to love them better. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's been some really cool byproducts, of making the film that we've gotten to see. And it's been really, really a neat experience. It was hard work, but I
Yeah,
Yeah.
think worth it.
And interestingly too, it's like it's a snapshot. It's if I was to go
sure.
back now, I might have different wrap up feelings, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, perfect sense.
And it's interesting because I've had to reconcile with the fact that being known in that moment was what it was, even though right
Mm-hmm.
now might be being known a little different.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, 100%. It's like you were really in that moment and you were vulnerable with where you were right then. Which, I mean, let's talk about vulnerability for a minute because you brought it up, and I think it's hard to be vulnerable, right? And put yourself out there in the world. And yet I think it's what people are really craving. They want to know. It's almost like you guys were like, well, we'll go first. We'll share this with you in the hopes that you'll see yourself in it. I mean, what does it feel like to be that person, and how would you kind of talk about vulnerability in the space of creativity? Like, how important is it? What are the things, the fruit that you've seen that bear in your journey, your life, your career?
I mean, I think it's obviously essential, right? But it
Yeah.
also comes with its layers of second guessing,
Yeah.
and you know, I'll let you speak to
Oh, it's
that.
fine. Yeah. I think that it's interesting, especially for men, to
Mm.
be vulnerable is a little less common. I think, especially in personal relationship, it might be a little easier to say something broadly, but like one on one. So there's two different, I think, powers and vulnerability. One is the public vulnerability where you can be in a room or on a stage
Sure.
or through a movie or through a song be vulnerable. But there's still like this piece there that's like distant, right? Like it's a little safer because you're further away from people. It still has the same effect. It still brings a
Mhm.
healing power, that I think God really orchestrated, right? Like a lot in sharing your weakness, right? Then it's like that's where we really
Mhm.
find our strength in Him and community. And but then there's a whole nother level of vulnerability, which is the one-on-one, which is much harder for men. I
Yeah.
think women are pretty natural with
Yeah.
that. I think, but I just seen the power of that. And I would say, for any men who would be listening, like to really encourage them to have the openness to be the one who does take that first step and does open
Mm.
up and does show what's really happening under the surface. I had a friend just last night call me because he was in the middle of a struggle, and he's really been someone who models for me, like, hey, I'm not going to call you after I've been through it and then I can say, oh, look what I went through and now I'm through it and we're going to talk about it.
Hmm.
He's the guy that's willing to call me in it and say, I'm struggling. I need you to help to just talk with me. And that's, and then also what's really cool is that he's like, I call you because you're the one of the people who are most vulnerable. You reciprocate vulnerability in my life.
Mm.
And I know that makes you a safe person. And I think that a lot of times we think safety means stability in people. And it does in a way. Of course, we want to be with people who are safe and healthy emotionally, mentally, spiritually. But vulnerability actually, even though we're expressing our mess or our weakness, is a massive sign of safety to people to say, I'm someone that you can trust because you are not other to me. You are my
Mhm.
people. My arms are open to you, regardless of which state you come to me in. And I think, that's just so important. And I do think that then again, on the broad level, from stage through song, through podcast, it's like we are doing it to people too. And that level saying you can come here regardless of who you are, what state that you're in, and know that, this is for you. And so it is
Mhm.
so powerful.
It really is. And I think it's really interesting that you brought up like the difference between sort of the public vulnerability and the personal vulnerability. And I've been thinking a lot about this lately. And maybe this is a little off the order of things, but I've been thinking a lot about how we're in this culture where there's just like a lack of grounding that people are feeling. I feel like a lot of people are saying that lately on all different fronts. I've heard this so much lately. And I've really been thinking about the fact that if we're not doing our work in here, if we're not being vulnerable at home with our people, if we're not working through the stuff, then we're not going to be good in the arena of life. And I think so many people, they want to talk about what everyone else should be doing or what we should be thinking or how what you should be posting. But like, we're not showing up really that way in our homes. It's kind of like, if you can't organize your own home, your own house, like how can you tell someone else how to organize theirs, type of a thing. And so I think that vulnerability that you brought up just made me think of that, of how hard that is. It's easier to like spew something on social media if you feel up to it, but it's harder to get with your people and even with yourself or with your creator and be like, I got to work through this. And I know you guys do that. I know you do that in your relationship. I know you do that in your life. And so, if people are listening and they're sensing that also, like this lack of grounding, this desire for, everything feels like we're walking on shaky ground, I think a lot in culture and today. Like, how do you think about that? And what would you say to people who are feeling that?
Yeah, I think like for me, I think of how easy it is to work in secondary emotions, and I think when we hear that phrase, in psychology or, these conversations about the work, right? Like that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about taking out the metaphorical shovel, digging through all the secondary emotions to get to what's underneath. And I think that is so hard because it takes tremendous humility, and putting aside what the easy emotion is to go to. So like to give you an example, like last night, we our daughter was like, and she's so sweet, but like she was up on her phone way too late. Nothing crazy. She just was talking too late. We realized like, oh my gosh, it's so late. And we had to go up there, and Sarah went up and was talking with her. I walked up and, Sarah was like, I got it. Don't worry. Go back to bed or whatever. Well, I had in that moment felt like Sarah was telling me like, hey, you don't have a voice here. Just, I got it. Go away. Right. And I felt kind of like demeaned in that, but that was not her intention at all. And at first, when I tried to express to her how that made me feel, I kind of went to that secondary emotion of like, I feel disrespected as a parent, that makes me angry. And it's like, sure, I might feel those kinds of things, but what was the harder thing for me to do was to like say, okay, look, I feel afraid that my voice doesn't matter anymore in this area. And I love my daughter, and I want to know that I matter in this equation. And I'm afraid that you don't see me as worthy to have these conversations. And to humbly say that, I think like, oh man, like I don't know what it is that like it almost hurts like your body to like go underneath and like take off the gut response of like wanting to just be annoyed or get your apology or get your own idea out and go to what's underneath and like expose the really hard part of what's really happening underneath. And I think the more we learned how to do that, it was amazing because like her response to me being angry was like not great, but her response
at 3 a.m.
but her response to me saying I'm just really afraid that I don't matter was like grab my hand and she's with me now, and I'm like okay, all right, like so hard to get there, man. We couldn't do it for a lot of years. It's taken 20 years to get here.
I'm surprised you brought that up.
Hey, we're talking about being vulnerable,
There we go. Yeah, no, I think that's so good. And, I was listening to this. I saw this reel on, and I actually sent it to you guys. I don't know if you saw it on Instagram, but there's this guy named Tim Ross, and he has a podcast, and I've listened to a couple episodes, but he said this thing about marriage. And I thought it was so interesting. He said, and I wrote it down, that, everything that you found out about the person you decide to marry is what got you to the wedding day. It's like, I like this about them. we get along, like whatever it was, is like, okay, I want to marry this person. But when you say I do, you're saying I do to everything you don't know. You're saying like you're making the commitment to who this person is going to become and what our family is going to look like or not. And if there's going to be success and how that's going to impact us, if there's going to be struggle, if there's going to be kids, there's going to be illness. It's like we're saying yes to all of those things. And to then like excavating ourselves through the different seasons of our life. Like, and I know that you guys do talks and work in marriage. And, it's funny. I will be super honest. Like when I go to a wedding these days, like Eric and I kind of chuckle, we'll sit and there's these young people and they're beautiful and they're up there and they're like, oh, this is going to be so great. They got everything. And I'm like, strap on your seatbelts there, you two, because this is like, and, it's like, and my friend Jen said one day, she's like, before her son got married, she said to me, she's like, the person you marry is the person that you're going to go through hell with. And you're going to have to figure it out. And so like frame that for us in terms of if you're a young person listening and you're thinking about that you want to get married someday, or if you are a couple, like in the midst of things, like, how do we give each other grace and like, but how do we think about this stuff so that we can do it well?
Yeah. I think you said something recently that really like it keeps ringing through my mind. It was the thing that draws us together, like the things we love and we think are cute about each other that are different, that we're like, wow, I'm not like that. That is so attractive. Whatever it is. Once you get married and you're married a couple years, you despise it. Like it becomes almost the thing that unwinds you a little bit for a while.
I can see that.
And then what we've found after going through, we've had a marriage that we really like each other a lot, but we didn't know how to resolve conflict very well. And that was really hard on us for a long time. And at times where we're like, I can't believe we did it. Like we did it.
Yeah.
And so recently we were laughing because the last 3 or 4 years, the things we loved then hated, we now love even more.
Yeah, it's interesting. So like when you're saying you marry what you don't know, that's totally true. But then even what you do know can turn to contempt. So it's like, so basically like I always give the example of, Sarah was like bold to speak her mind. And I loved that about her. And she like always had bare feet and it was like, oh, she's so carefree, and like she put her family first. But then like after we got married, it was like, that bold, like fearlessly speaking her mind piece turned into like, she's angry with me and she's, I don't know how to handle all this coming at me in an argument that's, behind closed doors now in our apartment and getting out of control. Or like, and she's like been walking in the mud and she comes in and like, into our bed and like rubs her like muddy feet, on my OCD legs, or I was like, or when she's, like putting her family before me, or before us. And so those things actually can flip. But then it's funny because now what Sarah was saying is those things that we went through the seasons of like, oh, that thing I used to love drives me crazy now. And then you almost get to the back end of it again where you're like, oh, you know what? That just becomes like the old things about them that you just learn to be like, this is my person. And they become endearing again. But that's only through time and faithfulness.
Yes.
It's like, because you do go through the hell where you're like, you could leave it all. And half of people do leave it all, and we get why. I mean, it's like, that's where we're like, it is hard. And people do, go through divorce. It's so difficult, but it is the thing when you do make it through those things or choose to stay through those things. It is crazy that, you start to experience like old love. And, I heard somebody say one time, the only thing better than young love is old love. And, you don't know it till you start to get there, that elated feeling of young love it's very similar. It's like that endearing, but it's even better,
Well, and I think you said young love. I think one thing you have to do as a human, and I don't think we really ever talk about this much, is you have to mourn young love. I mean, once you get married, you have to mourn it. it's gone now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, this is our new love, and it's the rest of our life. And if you can find, like, it's beautiful. So in the thing you were saying, what are you laughing at?
I was just laughing. I was like, yeah, you have to put like your young love dream to death, you know, just
well, you don't have to bury it. It's
Should we
gone.
do a ceremony?
That's a good
I think we
point.
should do a ceremony, a funeral for our young love. You know, we should go out back.
But they say if you tough out the hard times, 5 years later, like, there's studies that show you will be more happy than you've ever been in your marriage ever. So if you can grow and push past those sticky parts and stretch and figure it out, like, you will be happier than you ever have been.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's break that down like a little bit, because you know, there are practical things that you guys talked about, communication. You know, I mean, I know in my marriage, like, we've done counseling and we've had to have hard conversations, and we've each had to do our own work on different things, and we've had to get really honest about stuff. Like, is there like a tool or a practice that you feel like is really helped you weather those things? And I want to talk a little bit about like having a sick child and how that impacts a relationship, but just in general, like if you're speaking somewhere on the topic of marriage and someone's like, hey man, like what's something that I can do? You know, what would a couple of those things be?
Yeah.
I mean, hands down, there's one.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah.
Oh.
No, I'm curious to see what you're going to say. She's very confident. She's like, hands down, there's one. I'm like, ooh, I'm excited to hear this is.
Well, you know, it's called emotionally focused therapy, EFT.
Yeah.
And
okay.
Basically, a lot of times lately, like, I don't even know exactly where I got this, but a lot of times if we just explained our upsetness by saying, I've lost a connection and I want to reconnect. And the reason I lost my connection is always, let me see if I can get this right. The question, basically you're asking the question, at all times in your relationships, do I matter to you? Will you come when I call? I always forget.
I don't remember them all.
There's three.
Okay.
Maybe you can type them up. But the answer to all three of those, if they're no, then there's a loss of connection. So I can come to him and say, hey, I lost my connection when you threw me under the bus in front of your friends. You know, like, that hurt me. Like, I lost my connection. I don't feel safe right now.
Yeah.
And so in order to reconnect, I need to know that you understand that, you know, as opposed to, you're a jerk. You totally made fun of me. That felt like not good. I don't like you. You know, that's what I want.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I used to say. Like, that's mean.
That's a reaction. That's a natural, like, that's our defensiveness too, right? We're like, I'm not safe. That's the wall. I mean, I do.
Yes.
I do that.
And the response can be defense too, right? Like, geesh, well, how about you? You know, what about the stuff that you do to me? Or it's like, or it can be, wow, I'm really sorry you feel that way. I totally hear you and validate what you're trying to say to me.
It's easier to hear.
I think, you know, and for context of what Sarah's talking about, we struggled with conflict for many, many years of our marriage. And then we don't know why, but EFT, emotionally focused therapy, helped us so much. Like, we couldn't even put our finger on what it was about the approach. But that was really powerful.
It was honestly marriage changing.
Yeah. And then another couple of things I would say, just like kind of wide overarching brush strokes that I think are like mentality things. I heard somebody say that, you know, a lot of people say marriage is like 100-100. So like, you give and I give. And then some people say marriage is 50-50. And like, you give half, I give half. But like, I think the reality of that is like, how can you ever measure based on each person's own individual reality what that number really is that person brings to the table? I heard somebody say marriage is actually 100-0, because you have to decide, am I going to give today, regardless of what I feel like I'm getting back? Knowing that if you can live that way with someone else who's committed to the relationship, obviously we know not everybody's committed. But if you're with somebody who is committed to the relationship, knowing that when you give that way, that they will give back in return. And I thought that was interesting. And the other thing is always, for me, expectation. You know, I think I had somebody say, and I don't know why this stuck with me forever. They were just like, these are expectations up here, down here is reality, and everything in between is disappointment. So it's like the higher you set your expectation from reality, the farther you fall, the farther you basically are injured in your disappointment, and sometimes we can set our expectations of another human so high that they can't necessarily live up to all those things. And there are healthy expectations too. Obviously, we should have some expectation in a marriage and a relationship, but sometimes we have to really evaluate, what is my perception? Is my perception of what this should be realistic? And am I expecting realistic things from my partner? And being willing to adjust out of grace to be able to cope, when we're disappointed.
Yeah. And I think as far as what comes to parenting too, something we've learned is God made us both the parents of this child. Sometimes, and we catch each other, we want to correct each other's parenting, and sometimes we do need to help each other finesse, but God made us different on purpose to create to lift our child up and grow that child up. And so I think having kind of just not grace, but understanding that he's going to do it a little different. He's going to be a little heavier handed than I am. And that's okay, because that's part of my kid's development,
Yeah. Yeah. And kids need both. I mean, there's so much.
Yeah.
They need their dad to call them on the carpet about things, and they need their mom to go give them a hug, and, not to that dads and moms each can't play those other roles, but it's really true. Kids need both of those things to feel secure. And so I want to talk a little bit about, marriage and family in light of having a sick kid, a life that you didn't expect. And, a lot of people listening, we all have lives that we didn't expect on some level, right? But I think when it comes to being a young couple and thinking about your life together and the way your family is going to look, the things your family is going to do, it doesn't usually include learning your child has a life-threatening illness, watching them go through countless difficult things, living with an unknown future. That's the truth. As much as the days are normal, you have those moments you're like, well, like you said, Sarah, when you're making that movie, it's like, am I capturing time here? Am I marking time? Because I don't know. And, I know sometimes with Eric and I, when we're really at each other, sometimes it's just because we're scared about what we have to face or what we faced, or we're just sad about it, or we don't, we're just, and it's hard to sometimes say, I remember when Ethan was here and we'd go in the hospital and I'd rally super hard during surgery and the month after. And then a month later, I'd fall apart. And Eric's like, this is your pattern. You're great for a while and then you just lose your mind,
Yeah.
And it's just because I was sad or I was processing. And so, how have you all worked through and with that? And what does that look like now as you're continuing to raise Bowen and thinking about life and trying to be quote unquote normal, but living with this reality?
Yeah. Well, I think it's changed, right, over the 12 years. In the beginning, we would say the first time around, we didn't know how to grieve separately. We held each other in contempt for our grief. How could you, this, and how could you that? And we really were mad at each other for how we grieved.
Yeah, I had, as a creative person, to step away from the bedside in the hospital for an hour or two a day to process. I didn't know how to be helpful, maybe because Sarah was mama bear at the bedside 24 hours a day if she was allowed to be there. And Sarah was so I guess the only way I know how to put it is the mama bear thing, where it was doctors would come in and she'd have 100 questions and she would ask every question and know every medication. And I often wouldn't feel like I knew where my place was there because she had that so covered. What I could do was help I was like, hey, I'm going to start a page where I update our family and friends, and I'm going to write about what's happening in here and ask people to pray for us and update our family and keep a little journal of what we're experiencing here together. That was the only way I really knew how to use my gifts to contribute. And so she would say, well, how can you, go away for an hour or two in the middle of the day when our child is potentially dying? And I'd say, well, how is it possible you can like never, ever walk away from the bedside to like be with me or process, And it was like, I was mad at her because I felt like I didn't have a wife.
And I was
she was
mad
mad
at
me
him,
because she was like, well, you should be here every second
I
of every
didn't
day
feel
like
support
me.
from him in the way that communicated support to me in that moment. Now, in hindsight, I can look back and go, oh, he was doing what he knew to do. That's how he coped, We never gone through trial like that.
Yeah. And then when, those first two surgeries were so close together, but then when this one came, we had a big conversation where we were like, hey, how do we really screw it up before? And this time around, how do we try to grieve together and give each other the permission to grieve differently? And
we did better.
We did better. Yeah, we still had a few
the first time
losing our mind moments, but like
I'm kind of like you. Like I'm like fight, and then I'm like, and then I realized even recently I've noticed maybe I'm a little depressed, and we're 3.5 years out from surgery, but I think because we do projects and we find purpose, and we're just I think we're trying to cope with purpose sometimes, and then when we're done with a project, I know for me, I kind of like maybe I fall a little sad, like not full on depressed, but like just I don't know, like aimless a little and mourning and that sort of stuff.
I think we're all similar, the three of us, in the sense that when we feel grief or pain, we want to like run and do something with it that matters, right? So I think a lot of times in that it's hard to slow down enough to like process the real grief on our own. And that was one thing that I really talked about in our documentary was like, okay, so we're running, we're doing all this stuff, we're helping other people, we're trying to help our son, we're trying to be good parents, we're trying to make a difference in the world and share our story. And what if we didn't do any of it? What if we literally just let ourselves be? Like, would that be okay? And part of me goes like, I don't know. Would I be okay?
That, I literally think no.
I don't know if I'd be okay.
I can do it. Like,
and part of for me, because I'm like, man, I don't know if I could. Can I face it? Can I sit and face the grief?
Or were we just created? Or is it just in the fabric of our personal beings to like do that?
I think
yeah. Like
I think it is, but I also think there's something to be said. I think it is in our fabric to do that, but for me, I've learned, and I'm speaking for myself, that like I have to create this space for myself to sit and be with my grief.
Yeah.
And feel it and allow myself to cry and allow myself to just be sad because I'm sad. And
like you were saying, back when we had the first 2 surgeries, they were kind of back to back within the first year. So we had like 1.5 years of just complete trauma. You find out you have a dying child, then your child comes and it's just horrid. And then you finally get out of the hospital and you got to go back again. And I remember the night before the second surgery, he was maybe like 5.5 months. We were at the Ronald McDonald House and it was like 10 o'clock the night before surgery. And he wanted me to just hug him and hold him. And I was like,
and I wanted to,
no, we have to get back to Bowen. He needs us right this second.
And I said, can we just take a minute to pray and just be together and try to talk about this, But she, in her mind, was like, man, this is moments away from our son. And what if he is gone?
Yeah. Like, what if we don't get more moments? And so all that to say, like, as we went out of that season and things began to stable out, one thing I didn't accept for myself, and I don't think you accepted for you, was that we endured trauma. Like, the whole time, like, my son is being traumatized. My other kids are being traumatized. I didn't really, because I'm fight or flight and I fight, I'm not being traumatized. I'm fine. Like this, like, or I'm not fine, but I mean, I'm not going to take on
You can
any of
handle
that.
it. You can take it
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Like I got it. Okay. Whatever. Well, I think we both were traumatized in the way we like kind of like fragmented during that trauma. We started to go apart. So we had then after that some more marriage stuff to kind of like, we kind of drifted. And then finally, maybe 5 years later, we figured it all out and came back together.
Yeah.
So.
And I think one of the things that I've reflected on just in doing like the nonprofit work that we've done and serving all the families, which has been great, I've also reflected that it is a bit of a trauma response. And maybe this is my own thinking, but there is something true. I think serving other people is healing. I think that that serving others is an awesome thing to do, and it does help heal us. And I do think we have individual callings on our lives of how we're supposed to make meaning out of our story. And I don't think anything is ever wasted. And so I believe in that. But in hindsight, in reflecting on myself, it's like we ran so hard and was so successful in some ways that felt so good. But in some ways I was running from what I really needed to deal with. I was running from my grief. It was a trauma response to keep going. And I wonder, like, I feel like a lot of people do that, and so I think it's important to acknowledge that that's probably true. And at the end of the day, like you guys were saying, like, you got to meet yourself at some point.
Yeah. And I think too, we run because if we don't, will we be swallowed up with grief? Like, will we be able to get out of bed in the morning?
Yeah.
Will we be able to function if we don't
Yeah.
fight super hard this way?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting because it kind of is like physical therapy in a way where like, okay, I've got this joint that's messed up. And if I don't keep moving it, then it'll be stuck forever.
That's
and
a
I do
great
think
analogy.
it's like, you can kind of like, apply that to like that. Like if I don't keep moving my heart, maybe it'll be stuck forever,
That's exactly, that just hit the nail on the head for me.
Yeah,
That's how I
think
feel.
so.
Like if I stop, will I be swallowed up? Will I be stuck?
Yeah. Yeah. But that is also where the important work comes so that we can continue doing whatever it is that like we're purposed to do.
Yep.
So I want to talk a little bit about faith, because when we face hard things, these are questions that we all have. I believe humans all over the earth have these questions, whether they're honest about them or not, whether they're just, in the car when you're driving by yourself or something that you actually articulate. But, faith is the foundation of your life and your family. It's the foundation of my life and my family. It's also a dicey topic that sometimes in this arena and climate of the world is difficult to talk about. People are uncomfortable with it. People make assumptions about it. I think it's actually much more nuanced than that. And I think it's much more of a personal journey than that. But I want to talk about it because I think it's the longing of every human heart is to know that they're loved and created on purpose. And so I'm wondering if you would be willing to share a little bit about that, about the faith, your faith as a family, as a couple, and kind of in the same, part, like, what if there's someone listening and they're like, this is a bunch of crap because this happened to me, and no way that I'm loved or cared about, or like this world is just like a mess. I know it's a big question and there's no specific answer I'm looking for, but I just love to hear from your hearts, like what you're thinking about when I say those things.
Yeah. We both grew up in Christian families and, at times had to figure out like, okay, how do we make our faith our own? I think Sarah and I have definitely even tried to figure out, how do we raise our kids in terms of like, what church do we go to and how do we handle hard issues at home? And, that, for us, like our relationship with Christ and just leaning on what we believe is like timeless truth, and scripture. And like, I think gives us something so much bigger than ourselves to hold on to, because like, And it's like, I'm just a human, you know. I think one thing I think about when people will say, well, if there really was a God, then how can things be so broken, or how can there be suffering? And I think, you know, that expectation is so interesting to me, because I think, well, if there is a God, what makes him God? It's that he's not broken. And the only way for him to be God is that we are not, because then he wouldn't be God if we are not. What does that make us in return? That makes us broken people. Broken people make bad decisions. Sometimes broken people can, you know, make hell of other people's lives or hell of our own lives. Broken people can get sick. Broken people can die. And I think for us to say, well, now we blame all that on God, and I do feel that's a little bit of a trite argument, you know, because we're like, you know, what I do see is that in our brokenness, we have a God who is other, who is God, who is not broken, who looks at us and says, though you can't be God, though you are broken, I love you enough to come meet you where you are. You know, I think that's what's so beautiful about our faith, is that we believe in a God who actually laid his life down for us in service. It wasn't, hey, you know, like, come serve me, you know, perfectly, or you're rejected for eternity. It's like, no, I'm going to come meet you where you are, empathize with your pain, lay my own life down in service for you. And the beauty of the way we get to live that out becomes the contrast. And I will say this, every single person has a religion, whether they admit it or not. We are religious. We are religious people. Like you said, our heart longs to rely on a system that is greater than our own selves. Yeah. So like there is, you know, like right now, like you can see one, you know, glaring religion of secular humanism, which is like, hey, my religion is doing whatever makes me feel satisfied or good, or whatever feeds my personal desire to be happy. That's a religion in and of itself. And people are as devoted to that religion as I am to mine. What's beautiful, I think, about our faith is that in looking at Christ laying down his life for those that he loved, is that we in return get to say, my religion can't be about what makes just me happy, or what just fulfills me, or whatever wind blows today, I follow. It's saying there's a timeless truth that I follow that says I am made and designed to live my life in that same way, to lay it down for other people, and to give myself in sacrifice, whether or not it makes me happy. But it's what changes the world. It's what brings peace. It's what that's that self-sacrifice, following that example of Jesus, is what causes us to say, it doesn't matter necessarily what makes me happy today. My life is devoted to God. My life is devoted to others. And I'm here to make this world a more beautiful place through serving, laying down my own rights for the rights of others. And I think that mentality, in the way that we share our story, in the way we give our lives, in the way we set our own pain aside, or in our own pain, try to serve others vulnerably. It is driven by that faith, that there's something so much bigger than us, our own desires and our own happiness.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sarah, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, that was great.
You did it.
I mean, how do I follow that?
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. And I think that, you know, it's okay to ask questions about these things. You know, it's okay to wonder. I know in my own experience after Ethan died and the years that followed, like the people in my life who gave me permission to ask every question, to wonder, I mean, every question you can imagine, I asked, you know, and I think if you're listening, I want you to know, like, it's okay to ask those questions, and look for someone in your life that you can ask those questions to. God is never afraid of our questions. And I think that's part of cultivation of faith, is the space for people to be able to ask.
Totally.
100%. Yeah, I think there's been an interesting feeling that people get, that when they're in a church or in a group of people of faith, that if I express a doubt,
Yeah.
then I'm not worthy. They'll think I'm not worthy. They'll think I'm less than. They'll think I'm not a good believer, or that I'm not, whatever it might be. Even if it's not expressed, it's a very natural,
Yeah.
I think, place to go of shame. But there's so much freedom in being able to process those things. Sadly, I do think that there is a subculture of religious people who do, maybe even out of their own insecurities, to want to elevate themselves, do sometimes shame others for the hard questions, or journeying in and honesty on their pursuit.
Mhm.
And I would say, like, the most beautiful, people that I know and I encounter are those who can say, "Hey, look, this is what I believe, but I love you just as you are. And
Yeah.
I'll walk with you just as you are, regardless of the questions, regardless of the doubts." And in the way we believe, it's like, we believe that God is not shaken by our doubts. If in
Yeah.
fact he's God, he's not
Yep.
gonna it's not gonna shake him up. He's like,
Yeah.
he knows our hearts,
Yeah.
and I think that when we can extend that grace to others, that's a huge piece that's missing in our culture right now too, is the willingness for me to say, "Hey, this is what I believe, but guess what? I still love you, even if you believe differently than me.
Something
I still
different. Yeah.
fully love you." And we're allowed to debate. We're allowed to talk, right? Like, don't you feel like that's kind of missing now? It's like
Yeah.
that ability to be able to say, "This is fully what I believe, and I'm not sorry for what I believe, but I also love you and what you believe, and I see you and I hear you and welcome you to walk with me."
Yeah. And let's sit down and talk about it. Tell me how you got here. Tell me, what your experiences that brought you here to this table, to this day, to this idea. I think that's the most interesting part of being a human, is to be able to ask each other those questions. And we are missing that in our culture because we're just judging one another for all kinds of things instead of, you know, giving grace. So I still remember when there's two things. When Ethan had a surgery and we got to the ICU, you check in and you're waiting to see your kid, and there was a security guard there. And we had been like, these people knew us. We were like frequent flyers. And so Eric says to the lady at the front, he's like, "Well, what's up? What's going on?" He's like, "Well, there's a dad here, a young dad, and he lost his mind. His kid's really sick. And so we had to call a security guard." And, we got back, and Eric's at the time, probably like a late 30s lawyer, looks the part, whatever. He's like, "Man, if I didn't know any better, I'd do the same thing. That's how I feel." He's like, "I want to start screaming and throwing stuff too, because I'm mad my kid is sick. And so it's like, none of us are. It's just, he's not going to do that, but that's that feeling. And so it's like, these are real things. It's okay to say that, even though he's not doing that, doesn't mean that he didn't want to go over to that young man, put his arm around him, to, "Hey man, I get it. Like, I totally, I see you." Or I still remember times when, we've been in the hospital with our kids, and it's like, I think that's like one of the holiest places I've ever been, because these are people who are just showing up. They all have a different story. They all have a different, I don't know where they arrive, but they're there, and they're loving their kids. And, I think if we can meet each other in those places, I think that there is so much goodness there. And I think we just miss out on that opportunity a lot. And so I guess it's like back to like the individual vulnerability, the one-to-one relationships, and showing up in that way. So, like, kind of as we wrap up here, we've talked a lot about our challenges, or I think there are portals. Like, we each get different portals, right? So sometimes there's all different kinds of things that we experience. And, this season, I really want to focus on like who we become and what we create from the heartaches that we witness in the world around us. Like, how does it change us, and the adversities that we face? And so I'm wondering if, it kind of in closing, each of you could share a little bit about, something that you really like about yourselves that you've become because of what you have experienced in your life, and how you've seen it, the hard things bear fruit in your story.
Um, maybe this is what you're asking. My mom always tells this story. When I was a little girl, I was in the nursery and they had me on my tummy, and I would lift my head up and look both ways, and it was like she was always like, "Oh my goodness, you were so strong and determined from day one." And I think part of that strength and determination has gotten me into trouble at times because it can come across prickly. But I realize, like, God really designed me to be this way because for many reasons, but one was because I have this sick child. I have this child and I have a family and I have a lot on my shoulders, and I needed to be the way I was created, determined and strong and curious. And I think I waffle between accepting that and then hating that. Do you know what I mean? But I think really it is beautiful. So I guess that maybe.
Yeah. I think
I love that.
Yeah, I love that about you. Unless she's mad at me again, you know.
Sometimes
Then
you
not so much.
I think for me, I think the journey to being free of what others might think about me, you know, I think the willingness to say, hey, this is who I am. And it's a little bit what you're saying, I think. Like, this is who I am. This is who I'm designed to be. These are my gifts. This is the way that I use them. Being able to exercise the word no when it's like I'm asked to do something that I know doesn't fit into my gifts or into my time that I want to give to my family or to my primary callings. And so learning, I think that, like learning to embrace my gifts, who I am, the voice God has given me, and share our story or my story or our story, our family story, whichever it is, or even sometimes other people's stories.
Yeah.
You know, with no apologies and be able to say, hey, this goes where it goes. This is what I'm called to do. And just be content in that, where I am, doing what I'm meant to be doing. And I think maybe that is the word I'm looking for, like contentment. Just learning to be content in the season, regardless of what I hoped it would be, or what response I hoped I would get, or the affirmation I do or don't get, or whatever it may be. Like, just, living in my own skin contently, I think is the place
That's
I've
a gift of
finally.
age too.
Yes, I think it is. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It takes age.
Yeah.
Something you can't necessarily have like in your 20s or even 30s, I don't think.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Those are great. Those are really great. So if people want to find you, where can they find you? Online, on social?
So bowensheart.com has our family's story, story with Bowen. That has, the common thread that we share with the heart disease world. And then my music, our documentary also is at matthammitt.com. You can find that. And probably the easiest way is you can find me or Sarah very easily on social media. We're both on Instagram and Facebook. I'm on Twitter, just Matt Hammitt. And then I think all your stuff.
Google will pop right up.
Yeah,
So.
Yeah. Yeah. If all else fails,
just
the old
Google.
Googles will help people out.
Well, we'll link, all that stuff in the show notes. I just really appreciate you guys coming on today and being so honest and sharing. And one last question, like, what's next for you? What are you working on? Anything exciting that you can share with us?
Yeah, so one thing I'm really excited is I've been working on, well, there's two things. A fatherhood program for young dads, just to help them feel empowered to be able to take on that role, to be a great dad, even if they don't feel equipped for that.
And specifically in crisis pregnancy, correct?
Yeah, that's part of it, but it's even further than that, but that's part of it. Yeah. And and I think a lot about that with dads who might be expecting kids with illness too, like that's part of my heart in that. And so the organization called Save the Storks out of Colorado Springs, and we're doing a video series with that. But I'm also working on more music right now that I'm really passionate about. I think I've taken a few years off of recording and putting anything out, and have some opportunities potentially to do some more music on my own and with some other people. And I'm very excited to see where that goes. So
That's awesome.
And it's always weird to see the speaking side of things blossom. That door just continues to be blown wide open. It's nothing I ever really anticipated. I've always been an artist, not so much a speaker, but that I've blossomed in that area and continue to get opportunity. And so I'm trying to embrace that, but also stay true to my primary gifting of music. So a little bit of a balancing act this year, but some good stuff in our family. I don't know.
I'm trying to think I need to just be present with the kids. I mean,
they're so busy at their ages.
The last half of them being home. And I think a lot about, we just did a lot of creative projects that I was a part of. And so, I mean, I do have some more heart CHD. I have an idea I want to do. But I always say I'm pregnant with an idea and I'm in labor, but I haven't birthed it yet. So I'm I'm pregnant with an idea, and
we're working on baby number 5, but it's not a human baby.
Yeah. Right. It's an idea baby.
And I'm just waiting to feel like God's release in the time and the motivation to get it down. Does that make sense? I know it's in there. I just need to get it down. So
Yeah.
That's
awesome.
And then Bowen's status is that he ate too many hot Cheetos last night and he was vomiting this morning.
Oh, geez.
But other than that, he's really good.
That's awesome. And is he still doing music? Is he still performing and doing music with you?
Yeah, he still comes out from time to time and performs. He's kind of getting to that age where he doesn't want to do it as much right now.
Yeah.
So
I can see that
we'll find out where that goes long term. If he
wants to.
He's still very passionate about music. We'll find out if he still keeps the passion to keep writing and performing his own. But Emmy really has been a big surprise to us.
Yeah,
our oldest. She started playing guitar, writing music, and she has this unbelievable voice. She just I don't know. I always knew she had a pretty voice, but it's just starting to grow in ways that I just never imagined. So it's really been neat to watch her grow in that area.
Awesome.
Totally. And and as far as Bowen last night, we're in bed. It's about 10:30 and he comes down. He says, I can't sleep. I got to write a song. And so he grabbed paper, he grabbed a pencil, and Lewis and Bo literally sat there probably for another hour and wrote songs. And so, I mean, this is a very common occurrence in our house. So
this is a true creative.
Yes. It was so fun. And so, they're just, and his health status is just wait, I mean, he's going to go in the next month. I don't even know if you know this.
Do tell.
He's going to go in the next month and he's going to get all his liver checked and have an exercise tolerance test and kind of do the checkup after the Fontan.
Sure.
It's been about 4 years at that point. So we kind of have to start looking at some of the potential negative side effects to his surgery.
Yeah.
So.
And then we'll get some more projects to outrun the grief.
Yes,
that's right. Let's keep pumping that stuff out. Well, it was great to be with you both today. Thank you so much for your time. I always love spending time with you. And we just send love and blessings to your family. And I can't wait for people to listen in.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Jessica.
you.
Thank you for joining me here on the Heartstrong podcast. Please rate and review this podcast and share an episode that you love with a friend. Because when you do, you help us grow our mission of encouraging people to grow through the challenges of their lives and to live their full potential. We'll see you next time.